In a business world often dominated by men, Cristina Ferreira and Maria Costeira shine as inspiring examples of female entrepreneurs and investors who not only understand the world, but have also contributed to shaping Braga's ecosystem. With an eye towards the future, Startup Braga remains a driving force of progress, thanks in part to the vision and dedication of these women. Tune in for another episode of 10x Forward.
So Maria, I think you probably were very involved in the beginning of Startup Braga and the start of the booming of the local ecosystem. I remember being part of the first accelerator and the first editions of that. But maybe if we can start by the beginning, can you remind us how things started? I think that would be an interesting beginning of our conversation.
Well, I was not really involved in the beginning of Startup Braga. I was involved in the establishing the fund of Startup Braga. So I had met Carlos Oliveira because of when he just sold his company from Microsoft. I had just arrived back to Portugal, and he told me, I have a big challenge for you, which was INL, and we're opening this fund, and you got to come here. Believe me, I'd never gone to Braga in my entire life. I knew nothing about it. And I tell him, if you had a nanotech lab in Braga, I would know. And he tells me that's exactly the problem. And we have this incubator, and you really got to come and see it. I came to Portugal for a 6-month sabbatical that obviously it extended quite a lot. I got to Braga. I did realize that there was an IGO on nanotech in Braga, which I was quite impressed with the infrastructure at that moment in time. And I got to Startup Braga, and above all, I was very impressed with the team itself, the management team, with Daniela, with Miguel, with their excitement about bringing it all together. Coming from the US, the entire Portuguese ecosystem was kind of a shock to me, but we can discuss that later on in terms of ambition and in terms of what they consider a seed round and many other elements. But at least I saw a very young enthusiasm about trying to make things happen. So I think that would be the beginning of it. And then, Carlos wanting to build a tiny little fund, basically out of angel investors, and we're all putting money out of our pockets and see what that would lead. That was the starting point.
Super cool. So actually on my side, I think I remember going to one of the first, if not the first, accelerators. I've known Daniela and some of the people that were involved. I think I don't know how many years ago, maybe 15, 10, at least 10.
We don't count. Don't
count exactly. It's a dangerous. It's dangerous to do that. So on my side, I think I remember the early days for me were to go in person, and right now lots of things are remote, but back then we would travel 3 or 4 hours and meet everyone in person. So I knew Daniela and some of the Startup Braga people, and I believe it was a very, very strong ecosystem trying to look outside, understand what the best practices were, and understand how to run an accelerator very similar to what was happening in the US. So I think Startup Braga was very, very a pioneer in that sense. Super interesting. So
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think that the point there, and that this is still the merit of Startup Braga, because in those times the word deep tech it was a buzzword that no one really knew what that meant. And because of some crazy people, myself included, that touched so much in hardware, going out, and because, again, the INL and the strength of the university and trying to think, let's invest, also digital, but let's go after things that have a much more substantial scientific base. And, of course, there was not a lot of money but there was a big strength in terms of the community. So if you look at, for instance, we have Ruby Nanomed from INL, that was the first company, and afterwards became the first invested company by the IC Accelerator. And that's clearly from the inception of Startup Braga. The fact that we went out and had conversations with people that was not the usual target market in the country. And when we, when in this country, when we were discussing it, seed rounds that were needed of 10 and 20 million, even today, people look at us like you're out of your mind, right? I said, well, maybe we are, but that's what's needed if you're going to touch certain things. So yeah, I think that was a big definition of what Startup Braga was in its inception, was trying to go big and go in different areas that were not very common, at least in Portugal at those times.
So when you look back, and we can talk about, like, I have a couple of examples, like we have at least two or three portfolio companies based out of Braga. So I think I have lots of good things to mention in regards to the ecosystem, but also some things that, like, maybe these companies will lack, but we can touch on that. Looking back, do you feel like, what do you feel like the Braga ecosystem gained with Startup Braga? Like, what are the things we should be really proud? Like, maybe you have a better sense of that. You already mentioned some international investors coming and investing in companies.
I think bringing also mentors, and a lot of it, and also because of my network and Carlos' network from outside, from the US to Georgia to the UK, France. So that really brought something that had not been seen, at least in the north of the country. And that was quite, wide opening. I think we're also very brutal in terms of the way we approach the system and the feedback about, no, you're going nowhere, this is X, Y, Z. You got to rethink the entire thing, because no, that's not going to happen. Sometimes that made us not very popular, but that was the way we thought it. Some things went wrong. Every time there's always something that goes wrong. Other things went well, but I think it brought the different dynamics. I think we also we were very strong, and I say we, and it's definitely was not led by me. Again, I think, from Alexandra, from Daniela, from Miguel, they really, built that sense of community, and Tiago about the dinners and the parties and everything, but where people were really excited about discussing not just what they were doing, but what was out there. And I think one thing, we were capable to teach them is that you could think bigger. And I think that's what the country lacks the most, is ambition. Substantiated ambition, but ambition overall. So yeah, we tried to do that. I think to a certain extent we succeeded in some of the companies. Obviously, then COVID came and a lot of things changed, and daba. But yeah, that was the beginning, and I think it was quite exciting. And there's some very good companies that came out of it.
Actually, I think our first investment at Inico was a company in Braga.
Which one, by the way?
Which was Attentive. It was also, I think it was also our first company that failed. Which are and these are always very, very good lessons. Of course, there's a lot of reasons. I think they did everything right. They went to the US, they did an accelerator with Techstars. They kept the tech and the people that had domain expertise in Braga. We got an international investor that managed to invest in Braga, that was Mangrove. So I remember boards. It would be very challenging. It would take us a day to get there, but it was super fun. I think, in regards to more the Braga ecosystem, what became obvious to us and to the company eventually was that there were some positions like sales and marketing. We were trying to get people to learn and to invest in like local people that could eventually like play by the highest standards. And those people in certain areas still didn't exist in the ecosystem. So we lost a little bit of time and we burned a little bit of money in this process of learning. We made other investments in Braga-based companies after. For example, Nutrium is one that I follow very closely. And with that one, I remember like the first thing we tell the founders is someone needs to move to Lisbon or to another place where we know we can get sales and marketing people because we learned the hard way. And like, especially and this is not Braga, like I could mention a million cities, but I think in Portugal, and when we look at the Portuguese success cases, the companies that became really successful, they were able to take advantage of their local home ecosystem, leverage the best thing like in that particular ecosystem, but also go abroad. So they could balance operations with like being ambitious and like running fast and having someone at your door every day that wants to eat your lunch.
On that, I'll build on that to say that this going international, and that's been a war with me, especially with Portuguese companies, is that there are companies that their target market is the US. But a lot of these companies, and I always, that was always a thing for me, is like, why do we completely disregard Central and South America? It's a much more natural market for us, especially for the kind of the products that a lot of these companies were selling. Why do you want to go into the first league of fighting with the Brits or with the Americans when you can have, 400 million people, 500 million people that you have a much more closer cultural relationship with and less competition? And I think this was something that I tried to pass the message, continuously, is that, you do not have the funds or the human resources to compete in certain markets. So try to fit your commercial strategy to the markets that you can actually conquer. And I think this is also still a lesson today about why do you necessarily have to follow that, going to London and I'm going to go to Silicon Valley, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there. There are companies that make sense, but I would say that for a vast majority, that is not the case necessarily. And learning that, but people were so in that mindset that was hard to pass the message. It's like the startup hoodie mentality, which is great, but depending who you're targeting, believe me, the hoodie will not get you anywhere. So do I have to tell you to dress up for a meeting? Yeah. It seems so. So that was another thing. We were replicating models that do work in certain countries, but not necessarily. Like, if you're gonna go into a jury VIC accelerator and you're trying to ask for 17.5 million, can you please at least put a shirt on?
Minimum.
It's, you could be surprised and remove the cap. It is very impolite in Europe to have a hat at the table. So there are cultural elements that we still have to absorb. But I think you just mentioned very good cases there. If you think of how small, and I don't think it's just Lisbon and Porto now can attract whomever, and Braga is starting to get that international community as well, as a spillover of Lisbon and Porto, in the sense that there are no international schools in these cities anymore. They're completely full. So all these international expats are trying to find other cities where they can settle in. So it's quite interesting to see the kind of people that you now come across in Braga. And I live in Porto, but it's just like, wow, where and how did you find Braga?
Did you see the startup ecosystem changing? Like when we started having because in Portugal, yes, it did, because now I hosted a breakfast very recently, and I had a company from Portugal and everyone else is from abroad. Do you see the ecosystem in Braga also changing as a result of these people relocating, a lot more diversity, or is it still
absolutely no idea, because I have disconnected myself from the ecosystem. I moved to Porto. I work mainly abroad. on a very personal level, and if Miguel Amador, that we both know, and part of Startup Braga and Braga, will hear me, they start laughing, or Alex. So we have a group that we call ourselves Traitors. I kind of understood that I personally also have a cultural difference and a social mismatch with the Portuguese culture in terms of this wanting to do and the way to do it. So I thought it was better for myself to focus where I'm good at, and let other people follow a path that works for them. So I can't answer on that. I can tell you that in Porto I see a lot of movement of larger investments. I would call it experienced investors and experienced startups, but more than startups, I would say spin-offs of companies, of these owners and companies, including a lot of Israelis. I'm seeing a lot of Israelis coming in and bringing, obviously, they do know what they do. So bringing a diversity in that sense. So I think in the medium term, we're going to see a much more active market in Portugal. What I'm not certain is that if at any point in time, these will be Portuguese companies, because of the other issues that we know that affect the situation. They are beyond our control.
Look, I think that's super interesting, and I think now this spillover effect, like you mentioned before, that the pandemic changed the dynamics a little bit. Maybe that's why the accelerator was repurposed, and I don't go that often anymore to Braga, but I used to go regularly. I think pandemic changed that, but also changed there's a lot. I know we have investors at Indico that live in Braga. Some people moved from abroad and relocated here. So it's a city that's becoming way more diverse. But I guess that's happening everywhere. In terms of deal flow, I see two main trends. One, I think there's less companies being created compared to what we used to see, of young entrepreneurs with a dream, working on a university spin-off, and that was a very common thing in Braga. I think maybe there were a couple of professors involved in the ecosystem, so they would incentivize students to start companies, and you could feel that. I think right now, there's less companies being created, cost of opportunity is higher, people are paid better. International companies are coming, establishing themselves here, paying these people have good jobs. So I think that it's way more expensive for you to start as well. So I see that changing dynamics, and I believe it applies in the country. So yeah, the fact that entrepreneurs are not starting more companies compared to a couple of years ago, maybe because we are in a recession period, and other companies are really offering interesting positions to the local talent, that changed the dynamic a little bit.
Absolutely, and I think that's a problem for the country overall. But what do you think is the greatest challenge and the greatest opportunity that we have ahead of us in the innovation and startup ecosystem overall? You can say Europe, let's say Portugal, and then Europe overall.
Look, I think what we are able to do well is deep tech still. I mean, I'm very involved in AI. I think that's a very obvious thing for companies to focus on. Everything that's deep tech. You mentioned hardware. I think those are great opportunities. Also, Portugal generally is going through an interesting phase where I think there's more money to be deployed in Portugal than in other ecosystems. So there's lots of funds. There's lots of funds that were created in the last 2, 3, 4 years looking for companies to deploy this money. So from an investor perspective, I would love to see more companies created. I think that would be amazing. What I believe is lacking a little bit generically in Portugal is when you work for a company, or because Portugal is mainly a services economy, people are still not exposed to the very hard problems to solve. the ones that cost companies a lot of money, the ones that will target like 4 countries with, or regions with 400 million people that have a willingness to pay for a particular product. Because of that, sometimes my frustration is, why is everyone trying to solve the same basic problems if they are already solved by companies
Then you go
somewhere
in
else?
line with what I'm saying. I think we lack ambition.
Deep tech, exactly. Like, I think we lack ambition. And maybe like one of the reasons is because I'm not sure people are exposed to real problems that are hard to solve and that can become real companies that will differentiate in the global market.
I think we're humble culturally, and humble, I'm giving it a nice word to it. So I'll give you a last example. So this last cutoff of the EIC, Portugal got really, for the size of the country and compared to the rest, we're always quite well positioning overall, which is hard. It's the biggest in terms of deep tech fund. But Portugal asked the company that passed, and most of the countries, because this was the last cutoff of the last framework, so it's a very little money available. The Portuguese company asked 1/4 of the next company on the ask. And you look at them and you just say, for the love of God, that money will take you nowhere. 4.5 million in deep tech will take you nowhere. You had no roof, and you go and ask 4.5 million. Do you think I'm going to waste my time or the EIB to do the diligence of a 4.5 million deal? Because it is the opposite of the national mentality. You ask very little, so you stand a chance of passing. And then at the same time, you have other breed of investors that are saying, if you don't go big, go home, because we're not going to waste our time with you. So they have, then you see their shock in their faces of saying, but no, either you do it or you don't do it. What are you going to do with 4.5 million? Absolutely nothing. So, either make the ask and you still can get a no. But if you get a yes, then you can really deploy at scale. And I think this is something that, with the ANI and all of that, I'm trying to pass the message that we also have to be ambitious on what we ask, because if not, we're not going anywhere. But if we go back to Startup Braga, I think this was something that we really tried to push, is about, let's try to do something big. And some of these companies, like you mentioned, Nutrium, they tried to be big. As we said, Nanomed, a much later one, which actually is a fun story. The first time this guy pitched on us, which is Chemitech. So this guy comes in to the investment committee. He comes along. There's myself there and Carlos and Fraga. So he had the heavyweights on the table. And this guy, not young, okay, not old, but not your usual 21, like 30. And he pitches us on this chemical that he had developed to clean solar panels. And he got me really hooked on it because it made sense and all of that. And then Carlos, I think it was Carlos that asked him, so where are you doing this? Because you already have a proof of concept with the Arabs and all that. My mom is helping me in the garage doing the mix. And that was true entrepreneurship, because he didn't say, oh, my mom is helping. No, he was explaining how his mom and how they were doing the ratios and the mixes and which kind of balances it was using. And this guy was already selling to the Arabs on literally a garage business supported by his mother. And now he really sells across, I think, 40 countries.
Love it.
An interesting volume of sales. But the way he said it, the vision that was capable of saying, no, yes, I am a one-man band, but because I need the funds to do X, Y, Z, but I've invested my money and I got the resources that I had. I had the garage and I had my mom. And from here, I'm telling you that I can do sales, and he has shown, he has proven afterwards. So, but I need manufacturing. I need to produce, and I can't do that by the little amount of sales that I'm doing, right? So this is to say there's also quite this, good cases of people that are completely randomly showing up and saying, yeah, that's a vision that is. I said, but how did you get this formula that no one else managed to come up with? Well, because of the university and my thesis and this and that. And then I know I studied, universities with their big problems, but I realized, where could this really make sense? And this is a business opportunity. So everything in himself, although he was a one-man show, he was like, yeah, this is the kind of person I want to invest in, because I know he's not going to give up. He's going to make his mother work 24 hours a day and make
so
it
he
happen.
can sell.
Yeah, and it's still one of the good cases in terms of the portfolio of the fund, because even during COVID, he managed to turn around and adapt for a new segment, a new vertical. It's interesting to see how it's natural on some people. Entrepreneurship is something that it can't be taught. It can be improved, but either you have it in you or you don't have it in you.
And honestly, I think people from the north are way more entrepreneurial than the ones from the south. So maybe that explains some of
the need makes it happen. I think the fact that I grew up in Africa, and my father has a saying: "There's never a warm country that is going to be rich, because everything gets provided." And it is absolutely true. And even in Italy, you see the north to the south, and you see the difference between the north and the south in the entire American continent, because we don't have to worry too much. I ran a very, very, very large private equity fund in Slovenia, and these people had to save throughout the summer months to pay the electrical bill of the winter, and to buy the minimum clothing for their kids to go to school. A simpler jacket that could go to minus 15 degrees would cost 300, 400 euros. So the money had to appear. So the type of, it leads for you to have a different mentality in terms of how you allocate resources, in terms of ambition, and so forth. But I think we're learning. I think this mix of this influx of people from different regions is causing that social clash, which I find it quite positive. And hopefully we'll start seeing the change.
I think so. So, maybe to wrap up, I think looking back and trying to understand what has been a constant in the Startup Braga and the Braga ecosystem, I would say probably the deep tech DNA and still the connection with university. Like you highlighted, like a great story. I think that's amazing. And if we look for other stories, all we invested in from Braga, I think it was B2B, things that had a strong connection with university or people that were very involved, like in that tech transfer. So that's for sure to keep. And I think we should leverage what each city or which ecosystem is very good at. If you think about like other cool stories or success stories from the fund, that's probably going to be the trend. Anything else that's top of mind for you?
I think, people say in Porto, the North is a nation. And I think I think that ambition is there, and that energy. And I think it's what's going to keep them going and adapting to the new reality. So I hope to see many other garage business, but of this kind and this attitude type. And I think we still can have a lot to see from the University of Minho and from INL and so forth. I think the HR base is there, is now seeing how we promote this entrepreneurship capacity and feeling for it. So yeah, great years ahead of us.
Great years. Yeah. And to me, other biggest lesson we mentioned before is focus on the strengths, and whatever is not a strength, go somewhere else. Go to a place where you can keep learning.
Think big, always my thing. Think big.
I guess this is a wrap. Thank you, everyone, and good luck.
Thanks. Bye.